Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The darkness out here was a different beast entirely. Not the light-polluted, softened gloom of the city, but a heavy, ancient shroud that swallowed every star not blazing with a furious intensity. I liked it that way. It was why I'd bought this place, 100 acres of scrub and forest, miles from the nearest paved road, decades from the nearest neighbor. My only companions were the coyotes, the occasional deer, and the vast, unblinking sky above. It was a good life, quiet, routine was my anchor. Up before dawn, coffee black as the night it chased away, then out to check the fence line, mend whatever winter had broken, tend to the small garden. Evenings were for books, for listening to the crackle of the wood stove, for watching the fireflies dance. Solitude wasn't a curse, it was a chosen path, a balm for a soul worn thin by the incessant clamor of the human world. The first hint came as a whisper, a tremor on the edge of my perception, easily dismissed. A light in the northern sky, too slow for a plane, too steady for a meteor, too bright for a satellite. I'd watched it from my porch, a tiny, unwavering ember against the velvet. For an hour it simply hung there, then blinked out as if someone had snuffed a candle. Swamp gas, I'd thought, or maybe just my aging eyes playing tricks. I'd shrugged it off, made another cup of tea, and picked up my book. Then the dog started. Buster, a scruffy shepherd mix I'd found abandoned on the county road, was usually stoic. He barked at squirrels, growled at stray raccoons, but he rarely bayed at the moon like a mournful wolf. This night he stood at the edge of the porch, hackles raised, a low, guttural whine rumbling in his chest, staring out into the absolute blackness of the woods. I called him, coaxed him, even offered him a treat. He wouldn't budge, just stared, his tail tucked, his whole body trembling. It was more than a coyote. He was terrified. I finally had to drag him inside, where he spent the rest of the night huddled under my bed, a place he hadn't sought since a particularly violent thunderstorm had rolled through 2 years prior. That night I woke up with a jolt. Not from a sound, but from a profound sense of wrongness. The air in my bedroom was thick, heavy, like breathing underwater. My skin tingled and the hairs on my arms stood on end. My heart hammered against my ribs, a panicked drum in the silence. I sat up, straining my ears, my eyes trying to pierce the familiar gloom. Nothing, no sound, no movement, yet the feeling persisted, an invisible pressure, an unseen gaze. I fumbled for my bedside lamp, flooding the room with yellow light. The pressure eased, but the dread remained, a cold knot in my stomach. I checked the windows, the doors, all locked. Buster whimpered from under the bed. I didn't sleep again until the first hint of false dawn painted the eastern sky in bruised purples and grays. The next few days were a blur of minor incidents, each easily explained away in isolation, but forming a jagged, unsettling mosaic when pieced together. My truck, which I'd parked facing the woods, was turned around in the morning, facing the drive. Must have turned it to load something and forgot, I told myself, though I couldn't remember loading anything. Tools I'd left on the workbench were neatly arranged on a shelf. My subconscious tidiness, I rationalized, I'm getting old, my memory's fading. But then came the marks. Small, perfectly circular impressions, no bigger than a quarter, etched into the metal of my mailbox, the wooden rail of my porch, even the glass of my kitchen window. They were shallow, almost imperceptible, visible only when the light caught them just right. They weren't carved or burned or drilled. They simply were, as if something had pressed itself against the surface with immense, silent precision. I tried to scratch one off the window, but it was smooth to the touch, part of the glass itself. Vandals, I wondered, but who would trek miles down a dirt road just to press tiny circles into my property? And what tool would even make such marks? The lights returned, this time closer. A distant flicker through the trees, a pale, pulsing glow that seemed to move with an impossible fluidity, gliding soundlessly over the uneven terrain. I watched it from my upstairs window, my heart a frantic bird in its cage. It wasn't a car, wasn't a flashlight. It had no discernible source, just a shimmering pocket of light that drifted and swayed like a jellyfish in an unseen current. It came closer, close enough that I could see the leaves illuminated by its eerie glow, close enough to feel the cold tendril of fear curl around my spine. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it winked out, plunging the woods back into absolute darkness, leaving me alone with the ringing silence and the frantic thumping of my own pulse. Buster was no longer just whimpering. He was an unceasing bundle of nerves. He paced the house, stopping at windows, letting out low, mournful cries, his eyes wide and unfocused. He wouldn't go outside alone, not even to relieve himself. If I forced him, he'd dart out, do his business in a frantic hurry, and then scratch frantically at the door, desperate to get back inside, his entire body shivering. He'd lost weight, his appetite gone. I tried to comfort him, but his fear was contagious, seeping into the very walls of my home, into my own bones. The true psychological unraveling began when I started losing time. Small chunks at first. I'd be working in the garden planting tomatoes, then suddenly I'd be standing by the well, an hour having evaporated. No memory of moving, no sense of transition. Just a sudden blink and I was somewhere else, doing something different, with no recollection of the intervening moments. It happened again while I was cleaning my rifle. One minute I was polishing the stock, the next I was staring blankly at a wall, the rifle disassembled on the workbench, 2 hours gone. I felt no fatigue, no disorientation, just a profound, unsettling blankness where memories should have been. It was like waking from a dream I couldn't remember over and over again. I started writing things down. A logbook, date, time, what I was doing, what I remembered. I tried to catch myself to be hyper-aware, but it was useless. The blanks would still appear, stark white spaces in the otherwise orderly ledger of my days. Then came the dreams, not dreams really, they were more like intrusions. I'd fall asleep, exhausted by the constant vigilance, and then find myself in a place that wasn't a place. A vast, echoing chamber bathed in a pale, sterile light. I would be lying on a cold, metallic table, unable to move, unable to speak, my body numb. There would be figures, tall and slender, moving around me, not human. Their skin was like polished bone, their limbs impossibly long and thin. Their faces were smooth, featureless save for two huge, black eyes that seemed to absorb all light, all hope. They didn't speak, but I could hear them, not with my ears, but directly in my mind. A cacophony of clinical curiosity, of detached observation. A sensation of something being done to me, a cold intrusion, a subtle rearrangement of my very being. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, my body aching as if I'd been stretched on a rack. I stopped sleeping. The dreams were too vivid, too real. The lines between waking and nightmare began to blur. I'd see them in the periphery of my vision, shadows that moved too quickly, impossible angles, the glint of those terrible black eyes in the dark corners of my house. I'd whip my head around and they'd be gone, always gone. One evening I was making dinner, my hands trembling as I chopped vegetables. Buster was whimpering under the kitchen table, his nose pressed against my leg. The power flickered, then died, plunging the house into immediate, suffocating darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, my heart leaped into my mouth. Then from the living room I heard it, a whisper, not a human whisper but something else. A dry, rasping sound like insects skittering across parchment. It seemed to slither through the air, settling around me. I couldn't make out words, but the intent was clear. I was being observed, I was being watched, I was known. I fumbled for my emergency flashlight, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped it. The beam cut a trembling arc through the darkness, dancing over familiar objects, my old armchair, the bookshelf, the framed photos on the wall. Nothing, no one, yet the presence was overwhelming, crushing. It felt as though something vast and ancient was standing just beyond the edge of the light, breathing down my neck. Then I saw it, a glint, a reflection in the glass of the large, uncurtained window overlooking the woods. Not a reflection of me, but of something behind me, tall, impossibly slender, its head tilted, observing, two vast, liquid black eyes. I didn't dare turn, I just stared at the reflection, paralyzed by a primal terror that rooted me to the spot. The whisper came again, closer now, a dry rustle in my very ear, echoing inside my skull. It felt like a probe, a silent question, an assessment. The power surged back on with a sudden, violent flicker, bathing the kitchen in harsh fluorescent light. I whirled around, flashlight beam still cutting through the air, my eyes frantically searching. The living room was empty. The window showed only my own reflection, distorted by my fear. Buster was no longer under the table. He was a whimpering bundle of fur behind the stove, his eyes wide, fixed on something I couldn't see. I called the sheriff, a man named Miller who'd known my father. He listened patiently to my increasingly frantic tale of lights, missing time, strange marks, and phantom whispers. He advised me to get some rest, maybe see a doctor. He promised to send a deputy to check things out in the morning. He never did. I didn't blame him. My story sounded insane, even to me, but I knew what I was seeing. I knew what I was feeling. They weren't phantoms of a deteriorating mind. They were real, and they were here. The game intensified. It was no longer subtle. They wanted me to know. They wanted me to be afraid. One afternoon, I was walking the fence line, a rifle slung over my shoulder, though I knew it was useless. Buster, despite his fear, insisted on following me, staying so close that he kept bumping into my legs. We were deep in the woods where the canopy was thick and the sunlight dappled the forest floor in shifting patterns. I stopped, a chill racing down my spine. The air had grown heavy again, the silence profound. Even the birds had stopped singing. Then I heard it, a faint, high-pitched hum. It vibrated through the ground, up my feet into my chest. The trees around me seemed to shimmer, their outlines subtly blurring, as if the very fabric of reality was thinning. Buster whined, a low, terrified sound, and pressed himself against my leg, trembling. I looked up. There, directly above us, was a perfect circle of absence in the sky, not a physical object, but a void. A patch of darkness that seemed deeper than the sky itself, drinking in the light, and from that void something descended. It wasn't a saucer, it wasn't a craft in any conventional sense. It was more like a distortion, a ripple in the air that solidified into a shape. Long, slender, tapering at both ends, like a needle made of polished obsidian glass. It made no sound, just the persistent hum that thrummed in my bones. It drifted closer, then stopped, hovering maybe 50 feet above the treetops. From its underside, a single beam of light descended, not a focused laser, but a column of shimmering, pure white energy. It landed a few yards in front of me, illuminating a small patch of forest floor. The beam didn't just light the ground, it seemed to liquefy it. The leaves, the soil, the roots, they melted, boiled, then reformed, coalescing into a perfectly smooth, black disk like polished onyx. Panic seized me, my breath hitched. I scrambled backwards, dragging Buster with me, my rifle forgotten, slipping from my numb fingers. The humming intensified, piercing my skull, 1,000 tiny needles pricking my brain. The world around me spun, the trees blurring into streaks of green and brown. I tasted copper in my mouth. When I stumbled and fell, Buster landed on top of me, barking hysterically now, a sound that seemed terribly loud and terribly small in the face of this impossible sight. I pushed him off, scrambled to my feet, and ran. I ran blindly, crashing through undergrowth, thorns tearing at my clothes and skin, my lungs burning. The humming followed me, not distant, but inside my head like a swarm of angry bees. I didn't look back, I just ran, driven by an instinct far older than reason, until my legs gave out, and I collapsed against a thick oak, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. Buster was beside me, panting, licking my hands, his body still shaking uncontrollably. I stayed there for what felt like hours, hidden, listening. The humming eventually faded, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of insects, the distant cry of a hawk. But the forest was no longer a comfort. It was a vast, indifferent stage for the impossible. I finally made my way back to the house, shaken, bruised, and utterly terrified. The rifle was still there, lying where I'd dropped it. The black disc was gone, but a perfect, circular patch of scorched earth remained, a silent, damning testament to what I had seen. I barricaded myself in the house. I pushed furniture against the doors, nailed boards over the windows. I didn't care if it was illogical, if it made me look like a madman. I was a madman if madness was the only sane response to a reality that had ceased to make sense. Days blurred into a single, agonizing vigil. I ate little, slept less. I paced the house, a shadow of my former self, my eyes darting, my ears straining for any sound. Buster was my only company, and he too was a wreck, flinching at every creak, every gust of wind. They didn't try to break in, not in any conventional sense. They simply appeared. I was in the kitchen, trying to force down a can of cold beans. The air in the room grew cold, impossibly cold, even with the summer heat outside. My breath plumed in front of me. Buster, who had been lying curled by my feet, let out a choked whimper and scuttled under the table. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, writhed, then coalesced. It wasn't a sudden materialization, but a slow, deliberate thickening of the dark. First, the outline of a leg, impossibly thin, impossibly jointed, then another, then the torso, elongated, sinuous, and finally the head. Smooth, rounded, devoid of hair, nose, or mouth, just two vast, bottomless black eyes that seemed to suck the light out of the room, out of my very soul. There were two of them. Tall, maybe 7 feet, their limbs like polished branches, their skin a dull, metallic gray, reflecting the faint kitchen light in unsettling angles. They moved with a disturbing grace, a fluid, silent motion that defied physics. They didn't walk so much as glide, their forms shimmering at the edges as if they were not entirely solid. They stood in my kitchen, utterly still, observing me. Their gaze was not hostile, not angry, but profoundly, terrifyingly other. It was the gaze of a scientist observing a specimen, of a surgeon contemplating an incision. Detached, curious, devoid of empathy, I couldn't move. My muscles had seized, my throat was dry, and my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but my body refused to obey. I was a fly caught in amber, utterly helpless. One of them raised a hand. It was long, slender, with 4 digits tipped with sharp, metallic claws. It didn't point at me, but towards my head. And then the whisper returned, not in my ears, but directly into my mind, louder, clearer than ever before. Observation complete, subject analysis ongoing, collection imminent. The words were not words, they were concepts, thoughts implanted directly into my consciousness, sterile and terrifying. I felt a cold dread seep into every cell of my body, a chilling understanding of my fate. I was an object, an experiment, a specimen. My fears, my sanity, my life, none of it mattered. Then the second one moved. It glided towards me, its movements unnervingly smooth. I tried to back away, but my chair scraped against the floor, a pathetic, futile protest. The creature stopped inches from me. I could feel the cold radiating from its body, the utter alienness of its presence. It raised its hand, and this time its fingers reached for my face. I could see the intricate, almost crystalline texture of its skin, the faint, shimmering aura around its form. Its touch was like ice, sending a shockwave through my system. It wasn't rough, not violent, but chillingly intrusive. Its long, slender fingers traced the line of my jaw, my temple, my forehead. I could feel a faint vibration, a hum beneath its touch, and then a sensation of something entering my mind. Not a thought, not a word, but a piercing, surgical probe, cold and clinical, delving deep into the most intimate parts of my consciousness. It was rifling through my memories, my fears, my very essence, an invisible, ethereal violation. I could feel my thoughts being pulled, stretched, examined. Images flashed through my mind, my childhood home, my parents, my dog Buster, my quiet, solitary life. They were all being dissected, understood, categorized. I was being reduced to data. And then a searing pain, a sharp, white-hot spike behind my eyes. I cried out, a strangled, broken sound that seemed to be swallowed by the impossible silence of the room. My vision blurred, swam, and then a profound darkness began to seep in from the edges. I was falling, or floating, it was impossible to tell. The kitchen, the house, the familiar world receded, replaced by the sterile, echoing chamber from my nightmares. I was on the cold, metallic table. The figures were around me, their black eyes glinting in the pale, clinical light. The last thing I heard before the darkness consumed me entirely was not a whisper, not a hum, but a sound that was no sound. A silent, telepathic assertion in my broken mind, welcome to the collection. I woke up, or rather it woke up. I was lying on my bed in my bedroom. The barricades were gone. The room was bathed in the soft, warm light of dawn. Buster was curled at the foot of the bed, his head resting on his paws, his eyes closed in what seemed like a peaceful sleep. Everything was normal, too normal. I sat up. My body felt heavy, sluggish, as if I'd been sleeping for a week. My head ached with a dull, persistent throb. I lifted my hand to my forehead. It was cold to the touch. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight. Normal. I stood up. My movements were slow, deliberate. My vision was clear, yet everything seemed sharper, more defined. The dust motes dancing in the sunlight, the intricate patterns of the wood grain on my dresser, the slight fraying of the rug. I saw it all with an unnatural clarity. I walked to the window. Outside, the sun was rising, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and gold. The trees stood tall and green, swaying gently in the morning breeze. The world looked exactly as it should, but it wasn't. Something was missing, something vital. Like a piece of a puzzle had been removed, leaving a gaping void. My emotions felt muted, distant, like echoes in a long-abandoned hallway. Fear was a memory, not a sensation. Joy, sorrow, anger, all gone, just a profound, unsettling emptiness. I looked at my reflection in the window pane. My face stared back, pale and drawn, but otherwise unchanged. Yet when I met my own eyes, there was a hollowness there, a vast, unblinking vacancy that chilled me to the bone. They were my eyes, but they weren't mine. They were the eyes of a thing that had seen too much, or perhaps nothing at all. Then I noticed the mark, on the back of my left hand, just below the knuckle of my index finger. A small, perfectly circular impression, no bigger than a quarter. It wasn't a tattoo, wasn't a scar. It was etched into my skin, smooth to the touch, like the marks on my mailbox, my window, my porch. It was one of their marks. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air seeped into my bones. I was back, but I wasn't me. I was a vessel, a shell. My memories were there, fragmented and distorted, but the core of me was gone, replaced. I walked into the living room, then the kitchen. Every surface was clean, pristine. The furniture was in its proper place. The house felt quiet, waiting. I opened the refrigerator. There was food. I wasn't hungry. I walked to the front door. I unlocked it, undid the bolt, pushed it open. The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I stepped out onto the porch. Buster followed me, nudging my leg with his nose. He looked up at me, his eyes bright and full of the familiar dog love I remembered, a love I could no longer feel. I knelt down and he licked my hand, then settled against my side. I looked out across my land, the fields, the forest, the distant mountains. It was beautiful, so beautiful, and utterly meaningless. Then I saw it. High in the northern sky, a tiny, unwavering ember. Too slow for a plane, too steady for a meteor, too bright for a satellite. It hung there, perfectly still, watching. A faint hum began to thrum in my skull, not painful, not intrusive. Just a quiet, resonant presence, a connection, a link. I knew I wasn't just back, I was something more or less. I was a broadcast receiver, a beacon. A quiet sentinel placed back in its environment. My purpose had changed. My life was no longer my own. It was a silent, unceasing observation. My eyes were their eyes, my memories their data, my existence their continuing experiment. The light in the sky pulsed once faintly, a silent acknowledgement. I stared at it, my face utterly devoid of expression. Buster whined softly beside me, sensing the profound, terrifying shift in his master. He looked up at me, then out at the light, then back at me, his head cocked in confusion. I reached out, my marked hand resting on his head. I felt nothing. No warmth, no affection, no connection, just the physical sensation of fur beneath my palm. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the yard. I stood there utterly still, watching the distant light, waiting for the next signal, waiting for the next instruction, waiting to see what else they had left behind inside me. I was home. But the home was a cage, and I, its silent, empty prisoner. And I knew with a certainty that was no longer mine that they would always be watching. Always. And I, in turn, would always be watched, always aware of the vast, unblinking eyes of the cosmos, observing the specimen in its habitat. Always.